section that I had just wanted to discuss was just the blessings and the curse regarding the sons of Noah. That was my last notes that I had in this regard. And so, if you want to, we spent a good amount of time talking about the sign of the covenant and this establishment of this new covenant here, and how this covenant really kind of follows a pattern of how the covenants are made. And then it says here, we're talking about how Noah became inebriated and became uncovered in his tent, and then Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father. And looking at verse 24 of Genesis 9, Noah awoke from his wine, and he knew what his younger son had done to him, and he said, "Cursed is Canaan, let him become a servant of servants to his brothers." And he said, "Blessed be Yehovah, the Elohim of Shem, and let Canaan become his servant. Let Elohim enlarge Japhet, and let him dwell in the tents of Shem, and let Canaan become his servant." And Noah lived after the flood 350 years, and so all the days of Noah were 950 years when he died. So these blessings and curses that seem to be pronounced upon the sons of Noah. Now, the first one that is just smacking you in the face every which way is obviously in regards to Canaan and Ham. Now, we did discuss briefly that there is a common misconception. It's just due to not a terribly careful reading, and also the promulgation of a bunch of racists and eugenicists from the turn of the century in the late 1800s, and the rise of the Nazis, talking about eugenics and trying to talk about Ham being cursed. And there's a lot of racial gobbledygook that can come out of this. But I would remind you, of course, that we're not talking about different races of people here. This is the same race. It's the same family. Now, how can you explain that there are all these different races now? I mean, we're obviously all descended from the three sons of Noah, but how did some of them get darker skin and some of them get lighter skin? I really have no idea, and scientists, as far as I know, don't either. I mean, it could be some genetic factors, it could be environmental factors, it could be diet, implications. I have no idea, but if you believe the Bible, and I certainly do, indicates that Noah was the father of everyone who's alive on the planet now, right?
Yeah.
So there's not, in a sense, you can say, yeah, there are races, and people think of races now, but they're all descended from one family. They definitely look varied, but you've seen. Excuse me? Oh, please.
I was just going to say about genetics. I think there's a lot we don't understand about genetics. So if you look at a black person, you look at an Asian person, you look at a pygmy, and you look at someone from Norway. How are you going to say that these are? I mean, they're the same species. They can breed, but still something's not right here. Why are these so different?
Yeah.
And in Genesis, I don't think we've reached it yet. There's a part of it that I find extremely curious, so far as genetics is concerned. The story where Jacob causes his sheep
to mate in front of the trees.
Well, to be speckled. So it says specifically what he did. All he did was he took a certain kind of tree branch and he notched it, and then he put it in the places where the animals bred.
Mm-hmm.
And just by virtue of it being there, or by virtue of them looking at it, they bred more speckled. Now, what does that have to do with genetics? Something. It has something to do with it.
That's a very curious passage, and I'm glad you brought it up. I want you guys to remember that because we're coming up to that pretty soon. I mean, it might be next year for all I know. But
and I think that is to be said for. I think that's the reason for the how much difference we have just within the species of humans.
Sure.
I don't know how that plays in, but it's just they're just too different.
Something weird there.
Something's not
sure.
But wasn't it God that told them to do that?
No.
Doesn't even say, he just knew.
Well, here's the thing. I was actually doing a little bit of study into that this week in some way. But what's curious is the rabbis say, and I'm not, this is not authoritative obviously, but the rabbis suggest that Jacob thought he was doing something, but he wasn't. And that God came forward later and said to him, I caused the sheep to go speckled and spotted. And, God does say that. I did it. And it's not shortly after he stripped these poplars and, yew trees and whatever. I don't know if he thought he was doing something or he did actually do something, but God actually takes the credit and says, I did it. So I don't know what that is. Grace?
To me, I look at it the same as the serpent in the wilderness. How in the world is a serpent up on a piece of wood going to heal people just because they look?
Yeah.
It's because God did it. By their faith in looking up.
Yeah.
Because Jehovah, or however you say it, said, do it.
Yeah, he told him to do it. That's true. He didn't tell Jacob to do
they
that.
were having confidence
Yeah,
in the fact that he would keep his word.
that's true. That's
And
true.
I think it's the same thing with Jacob.
Yeah, absolutely. So it certainly could be. And we'll look further into that in a little bit. We keep getting just a couple of notes here in reminding ourselves that Ham was not cursed. It was his fourth son, Canaan, who was actually cursed. And this curse is repeated over and over and over. Now, what do you think it means that Canaan is, let him be his servant, and he shall be his servant, and the servant of servants? I mean, if you look at the cursed is Canaan, let him become a servant of servants to his brothers, that literally, in the Hebrew, whenever you see the same word repeated twice, which is exactly what that is, you need to pay attention. Because God doesn't just throw in a word twice for emphasis. I don't think that there's ever a time in the scriptures that I have seen where there's not a deeper meaning behind God saying, you shall deliver justice. You guys remember that section in the Mishpatim portion? And when he says a servant of servants, it's, some have suggested, well, the people of Canaan would be like the lowest of servants. Others have suggested that Canaan and the people groups associated with him would simply be incapable of freedom. They would not desire freedom, that they would need to be ruled as servants. And what's curious to me, and I don't know what to make of it, and maybe I shouldn't even say this, and my wife will probably tell me not to, but I will say, sometimes the United States of America, for example, has decided that we're going to go around the world spreading democracy and beat up people and then set up a democracy for them, and then we leave, and what happens? It goes right back to chaos. And I have, whether rightly or wrongly, assumed or just come to the conclusion that there are certain people groups on this planet who simply do not understand or desire freedom. They don't respond to it. They don't know what to do with it. Maybe it's not in their nature. Maybe they have no history with it. I don't know. But we have this idea, and it makes perfect sense to us and people in the West, that it's like, well, we yearn for freedom. If you try to enslave us, we will fight and we will die in order to gain our freedom. But other people groups around the planet just don't seem to do very well with that concept at all. And I can't say that it's the descendants of Canaan, but certainly some are. I don't know what to make of it. It's just a little weird.
So we briefly kind of touched on this last week, but the promised land is in Canaan, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the whole house of Israel were servants.
Yes.
Left.
Right.
And the land of Canaan became servants to them.
Right.
So maybe.
Yeah, I had read a couple of commentators say the same thing, that servant of servants is Canaan will become servants to people who used to be servants themselves, which is probably a pretty good way to look at it as well. I think that's entirely valid.
Well, and we know the rest of the story.
Yeah.
I mean, we know what Canaan actually did, and at this point, isn't Canaan extinct? Wasn't the complete lineage of Canaan cut short? I mean,
Well, it was supposed to be.
well,
But
I know that Moses and Joshua and such went through and wiped out a lot of it,
Mhm.
and then David came around later and took some
Yeah.
more of them out.
Yeah.
But that was what they were supposed to do upon leaving Egypt:
Yeah.
wipe out everyone in Canaan
Yeah.
and inhabit the land.
Yeah, that was the plan. But when Joshua died, he told them, "We have not completed all of the work." I mean, because God had told them, "I'm going to drive them out little by little and give you victory. Because if you just destroy them all and wipe them all out, then the beasts of the field will grow out of control and overwhelm you, and that won't be good." So he's not going to wipe them all out at once. And when Joshua died, he strongly admonished the children of Israel after him, complete this task, because if you don't, these people will be a thorn in your side. And they didn't.
Right.
They did not complete the task. And you can see that some of the descendants after Joshua decided, well, we're not going to kill them, we'll make them servants. They chopped the wood, they carried the water. And you can see all the way up until Saul, that we still have the Amalekites and the sons of, who is Haman directly descended from? Who's that abominable people who attacked on the way when they left Egypt? Amalek.
Amalekites?
The Amalekites, yes, Amalek. So they were still around, and David was still fighting these people. The Philistines, the Caphtorim. I mean, you can see what's interesting too is some of these peoples are mentioned much later in the biblical record. So they were never effectively wiped out. I think there's a good spiritual lesson there, that when we leave roots of evil in ourselves, it becomes a thorn in the side. It's going to continue to grow. You can't, trim that weed off at the ground. You got to pull it up by the root, or it's going to continue to grow and fester and cause problems. And they did not follow there's the overall lesson right there. If you do not explicitly follow the word of the Lord, it will come back and bite you on the rear end
And I
every
think
single time.
In the first chapter of Judges, it goes through each tribe
Mhm.
and says this tribe did not expel these
Yeah.
people from this land. This
Right.
tribe did expel the people from this
That's right. It goes through a whole list of them. It says they did not displace the peoples in their land of their inheritance. Yeah. So that's
So what did they do wrong the first time that they had to totally be wiped out? What was their biggest mistake? Because now we see for the fourth son, Canaan, is being basically the one
yeah.
that is blamed, even though he did not do anything, unless we don't know it yet.
Yeah, the Bible is real obscure.
Cursed.
Yeah, the Bible is real obscure, and we talked about that last time. The Bible is real obscure about what exactly happened here.
But what happened, because I'm not that familiar with the story, what did they do wrong that they had to totally be obliterated?
Oh, the Canaanites.
Yes.
Oh, well, there's all kinds of speculation. I would liken it unto looking at different places, different sections of the Bible which talk about great and complete destruction coming upon people, and looking at some of the things that those people did, like the whole generation before the flood, like Sodom and Gomorrah, Admah and Zeboim, like the city of Nineveh. These peoples seem to have been involved with great violence, tremendous sexual immorality. They're also, this is one, obviously tremendous paganism, but we also see something in this land of Canaan which doesn't appear in the biblical record in any other place that I'm aware of, and that is more of these giants. These giant creatures seem to be inhabiting that land as well. And so what can you infer from that? Well, people have inferred all kinds of things, but when you go and you look at the record of the Israelites coming against the sons of Canaan in that land that they were supposed to dispossess them from, you still have at least 3 instances that I'm aware of, where they come across giants, which to me speaks of leftover, a holdover, a remnant of some kind from the time before the flood, when we discuss these Benai Elohim, mingling with the daughters of men. And it does say explicitly in that text that these giants and the Nephilim were in the land even after the flood. So I think that there was an interbreeding, a mixing of a whole bunch of weird sexual immorality. They were sacrificing their own children in the fire. The evil of that place is recorded as being tremendous, and the people unredeemable, needing to be flush the toilet, as I like to say occasionally.
And even with the matter of evil, you wouldn't go through and kill the children, right? So
Yeah.
and that's where you can make a distinction, is that there's some times where he says go through and kill everyone, men,
Right.
women, and children. And other ones where it's like kill the men, take
You
the
can
women,
take the women and children captive,
Other
yeah.
it's kill the women, kill the men, kill the children, kill all the animals.
Yeah.
So for some of them, it's clearly an issue of blood. It's
Sure.
clearly an issue of intermingling.
Something
it's an issue
has
of
infected.
of pollution of the DNA. So if you're telling someone to kill children, I mean, come on, they're children. They haven't done anything wrong, so
Yeah.
it's an issue of DNA. It's an issue of the bloodlines.
And the potential for killing again.
Well,
Sure.
I think the Old Testament, I feel like the key to understanding the Old Testament is understanding the Nephilim, understanding what happened in Genesis 6. Because otherwise you're like, what is God doing? He's sending these people all around killing people.
Sure.
We know God is a God of love. God is love. He's not of love, he is love. So why are they rolling around killing everybody in the Old Testament? It's because you have to understand the pollution of the DNA, of the blood in Genesis 6. And then you understand, God says, hey, don't intermarry with these people. Don't intermarry with those people. That was one of the biggest commands, I think, was to not intermarry with Ham or Canaan or whatever, and to not. And so we.
I think that's just as good an explanation as any. I mean, there seems to be some serious pollution going on in that land, and they needed to be exterminated. I mean, you can see, like, when the Israelites got vengeance upon the kings of Midian, who incited Balaam to try and curse them, that they went and fought against these people, but they let any young woman who had not known a man live. So there was a definite distinction there. But then when the land of Canaan comes around, it's like kill everything. The only thing you can keep is metal.
One more thing to mention was, you look at Jesus, I think a lot of what happened in the Old Testament was making sure Jesus could come with a clean bloodline. And he came through Judah. And Judah is the only tribe that didn't eventually intermarry with the rest. It's the only one where the bloodline stays pure through to Jesus. Judah. Judah's
Sure.
alone. The rest of them dispersed,
Yeah, that's a good point. Absolutely.
Was Goliath a Canaanite?
He was a Philistine, as far as I know, from
Yeah,
Gath.
Philistine.
Yeah. And it says here in this next section that we're going to read, it talks about the Philistines come from the Caphtharim and stuff like that. So we're going to get to that in just a sec. Looking at the blessings that we have here, we have in verse 26, blessed be Yehovah, the Elohim of Shem. So does Shem actually receive a blessing?
No.
Doesn't look like it. It just says, blessed be the God of Shem. What does that indicate to you? I mean, Japheth does appear to get a blessing. Let Elohim enlarge Japheth, and let him dwell in the tents of Shem. Now, that's another one, but that's another curious thing, and I have a question about that. But Shem doesn't appear to have a specific blessing. It just says, blessed be the God of Shem. Gracie?
If you read it if the punctuation is correct in that verse, it says, blessed be Jehovah, comma, the God of Shem, semicolon, and made Canaan be his slave. So that would be meaning Canaan be Jehovah's slave, not Shem. It's just saying who Jehovah was is the God of Shem. But I don't know why God would put that in there if Shem had nothing to do with it.
Yeah, yeah. It just seems kind of curious that that doesn't really say that there's a specific blessing given to Shem. It just says, "Blessed be the God of Shem."
Also, is Canaan alive at this point?
That is questionable, but it does seem from a lot of the rabbinic commentary that they believe that he was. We talked about that briefly last week about how Noah planted a vineyard, and it would have taken years for these vineyards to grow in order for him to be able to eat of the fruit, according to the 4th year, and that it is certainly possible that there's no time indicator, and so when Noah decides to debauch himself and plant a vineyard, that could have been 40, 50, 60, 70, 100 years later for all we know. So it does appear that Canaan, in the rabbinic record, Canaan definitely gets some blame here and is directly involved. Now, I don't know whether that's true or not. That's pure speculation. Keith, did you have something?
Well, in a couple chapters from now, it talks about Shem's first child is like 2 years after off the boat. So, yeah, things are moving.
Yeah.
So, yeah, like you said, if we go 40 years in, 50 years in, who knows how many kids they all have that are running around. So.
Yeah.
I don't think the text is clear whether it was Ham or Canaan that committed this sin.
Yeah.
And also, I think it's interesting that it says he knows what his younger son did to him. Well, Ham's not the youngest son.
No, and that's not the Hebrew word for younger either.
Yeah.
It's the smaller. And it almost seems to be saying small as in
Minute
in unimportant, something like that. But it doesn't actually mean younger. It just means smaller. So I don't know exactly what to make of that, except that maybe the text is diminishing him in some way because of what he did. So the blessing for Shem actually is a blessing of Yehovah, not a blessing of Shem at all, apparently. This perhaps is indicating that the blessing of Yehovah is all-encompassing, is really what will set Shem apart. And I think that we'll see that, especially coming into the end of chapter 11, when the text will suddenly switch. Like in chapter 10, we have a huge, matrix of genealogical charts of the nations. But then at the end of in chapter 11, we get another genealogical annal, which is just for Shem, taking us to Abraham. So that's certainly probable. Now, the curious thing about the blessing of Japheth is who is dwelling in the tents of Shem? Let Elohim enlarge Japhet, and let him dwell in the tents of Shem. Is Japheth dwelling in the tents of Shem, or is Yehovah dwelling in the tents of Shem? If you remove the punctuation, it could go either way.
Yeah.
So it's like what exactly is meant by that? It's a curious passage, and you can see when you look at who the people of Japheth were. You know that Japheth means openness or beauty, that there apparently are two meanings for that name, Japhet, which is either a wide open space, which is curious too, because there's a little bit of a Hebrew play on words where it says, let Elohim enlarge Japheth. Enlarge and Japheth are really, really similar. They're based on the same word. Japheth, of course, it reaches, I think, his pinnacle in the Greeks. Javan is one of the sons of Japheth, and Javan or Javan, the Greeks to this day consider themselves Javan. And so the Greeks would perhaps be the pinnacle of the culture of Japheth. And their ideals about beauty and the nobleness of the human spirit and art and philosophy and beauty, architecture and sculptures and philosophy, this seems to be the blessing of Japheth, which is a tremendous blessing. However, if Japheth does not dwell in the tents of Shem, if you want to read it that way, what can happen to the wonderful benefits that are brought about by Japheth if he does not dwell in the tents of Shem? Well, his ideas of philosophy and beauty can be corrupted and become idolatrous if he does not dwell in the tents of Shem. If he does not place his great service to humanity at the feet of God, then his works can become idolatrous. And we've seen that they have indeed become idolatrous, that people worship the human body. The philosophies that were espoused by the Greeks would many times seek to displace God. So just some curious stuff regarding the blessings of Shem and Ham and Yafet. Do you have any other comments, questions, or concerns regarding that, Jerry?
You think that that might represent the carnal mind?
I think that's a great way to look at it. Yes. The spiritual side of the carnal mind. There's some fleshly stuff there, but that's like I think it was just a couple of weeks ago that I was talking about, well, we have, our flesh can really be physical appetites, but they can also have corrupted spiritual appetites of the soul, like you were talking about, the carnal mind looking at grandeur and splendor and beauty, and we begin to worship these things, and we also see a desire for intelligence, craftiness. These would be like the higher orders of fleshliness, and I think that Japheth unfortunately can really embody those higher orders of fleshliness for sure, and they need to be subjugated, brought into the tent of Shem, the God of Shem, in order to be reined in and brought under control. John, did you have something else in regard to that?
Yeah, it's maybe, how do they say that, off the boat or off the track? If you start with probably the interlinear would be better, but blessed Elohim, no, blessed Yahovah, and then the next verse it says, the Elohim, plural, of Shem. And I thought that was kind of weird. So it switches those two around. So first the singular, Yahovah, and then suddenly it goes to, in the same line, the same thought, to Elohim. And I don't know why.
Well, what is your understanding regarding the different uses of these terms in the Bible? When does he use the four-letter tetragrammaton of Yehovah, and when does he use the word Elohim?
I thought that Elohim was more that either talks about the Trinity or the combination of the Messiah and Yahovah.
Okay.
But I don't know for sure. I always am.
I know that has puzzled many people because the word Elohim is simply the plural of judge.
Yeah.
Well, Yahweh is a proper noun. It's
Right.
it's a name.
Yeah.
Whereas Elohim is a title. It's generic.
Well, it's a plural title.
Yeah. It's
So that's
we're
what
speaking
that's
of
what
a
has
group.
caused people some trouble, is because it's a plural title. Now, some people have said, well, it's a plurality because it's talking of plenary power. The royal we, if you will. You know what I'm saying? How a king will describe himself as we.
The verse leaves out the mem in mine. It says Elohim.
Oh, really?
Really?
Elohi? Yeah, that's certainly possible.
There's a real ignorance of that, and that's something that I was thinking of too. But I need to study it on my own, because if you read the King James version, it says the Lord your God, the Lord your God, the Lord your God.
Right.
The Lord your God this, the Lord your God that,
Yeah.
and that's not what it says.
Right, it says Yehovah Elohim.
Yeah,
Right.
Elohim is like, that's not the same thing. Those are
Yeah,
both.
that's
Lord
true.
and God are both titles.
Right.
They're not names.
Yeah, and Mike is correct. It actually does not say Elohim in the Hebrew. It actually says Elohai
Where?
Okay.
in verse 26. And he said, Vayomer Baruch Yehovah Elohai Shem. And he said, blessed Yehovah, God of Shem.
Okay, so
But then it's
mine was
Elohim
wrong.
that enlarges Japheth.
Yes, it does say Elohim enlarged Japheth, but it says Elohai, which is the singular.
Which is not plural, right?
Right. Angela?
Were you going to get to the distinction between those two?
Yeah. Oh, yes. I apologize. Thank you for bringing me back to that. It is commonly understood, whether it's correct or not, is up for debate. But I think it's a good. I think there are good textual indications which can lead you to this conclusion. Is that when the word Yehovah is used, it is talking about God's compassion and His mercy and His grace. And when the word Elohai or Elohim is used, it is always talking about God's judgment, His justice, strict justice, and that these two things are balanced. We as humans have a really, really challenging time trying to balance strict justice with compassion and mercy. It's really challenging. We want either strict justice or we want mercy, but we can't seem to balance them very well. But God does. Angela?
I think if you look back in Genesis, I think I remember this right.
I think.
That when He's creating all the stuff up until man, it uses the strict justice thing, the one that creates the laws of physics and the laws of the universe, the laws that you cannot break or bend. That what He creates up to that point, He uses the Elohim. When He creates man, that's the first time you see, I think, the Yehovah.
I think you are
He
correct.
looks at man and He says, this one's going to need my mercy.
That's interesting.
Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of textual indications that can show you that when the word Elohim is used, it is often talking about strict justice. And the word means judge. That's what it literally means. Elohi is singular of judge, and Elohim is plural of judge. It's the great judge. But Yehovah, and you would look at when Moses got stuff into the cleft of the rock, and God covered him over with His hand and went by and declared the 13 attributes of God. He continuously used the word Yehovah, Yehovah, Yehovah. It's very, very interesting. Anything else in regards to this little section?
Yeah, I'm just regarding Elohim, just a few things to add to it. If you read Enoch, there are listed a number of watchers, or maybe angels or archangels.
Oh, the watchers?
Where it says, this angel is over that, and that angel is over that. It discusses certain angels that had roles of authority over various things. And then you find, in Job, where is it? I forget which story it is, where the sons of God come and present
appear
themselves
before God. Yeah, that's Job, sure.
God, and and the devil is there with them. So there's this notion of levels of authority and beings, spiritual beings that have authority, at least in Enoch, and perhaps there we're talking the sons of God.
Mm-hmm.
And then also, places in the Scripture God is referred to the Most High God. Well, why would He be distinguished as the Most High?
Mm-hmm.
And then also King of Kings, Lord of Lords, and and why did Jesus test them? Where He says, "Oh, this man claims to be God," and He says, "Oh, but it says here,
you're all gods." Yeah,
ye are gods.
Yeah.
So and then if you look at like Indian culture, like Native American culture, where they have gods for all these various things. They have the god of the trees, and they have the god over, and it's kind of like there's like a spirit that has authority over each one of these physical items. And a lot of Eastern culture, which Hebrew I consider Hebrew Eastern, whereas Christianity I consider Western.
Sure, it's certainly been Westernized.
Yeah,
well, I think you're right in a sense, and I would agree with you in the sense that we can see a lot that God talks about the delegation of authority. And He is a great God of authority, and He does pass down some of His authority. And when He organizes the tribes of Israel, for example, and puts the heads of thousands and the heads of hundreds and the heads of tens, He is a God who definitely enjoys order. I mean, He enjoys creating order out of chaos, and so it would not bother me in the least to say like you read about in the book of Daniel, where this angel of Persia is fighting, or contending with the angel of
Principality,
Israel. The
which is the role of
principality.
authority, prince. We get
Sure,
the prince.
and we're so ignorant of these things in so many cases that we don't see the spiritual realm, that what is going on out there. Now, some people pay too much attention to it and might get themselves distracted, but it pays to be aware of the principalities of the air and what their potential roles can be. So yeah, I would agree with that.
Well, it's just if you look at other cultures, they have pantheons. That's why I was mentioning Native American culture, because they have a multiplicity of gods.
Yeah.
Maybe they're not the Most High God, but they have gods. In Greek mythology, they've got their Mount Olympus with all their gods, which translates really easily over onto Genesis 6, where the Watchers created giants. I mean, what is Hercules? Hercules is a Nephilim.
I personally think that is absolutely right. That the Greek and Roman gods and all these different gods that you see in all of these weird cultures are absolutely representative of the Nephilim in the days of Noah.
It fits, and they have the story that the Clash of the Titans, where all
Sure.
the giants fight each other.
Yeah.
Well, in Enoch, it says the punishment to the Watchers was that they would get to watch their children kill each other.
Yeah.
So I'm just saying that when it says Elohim, when it does say plural, I mean we should there, it's not crystal clear, but there are plenty of places in Scripture that piggyback off of this notion of a plurality of little g gods.
Yeah, there are lots of instances in the Bible where it's talking about the gods of the nations where the same word is used, Elohim, or Baal, or Baalim. It's another name. It just means Lord. And so, yeah, you can see that you got to be careful when you're reading in your Bible that you know who's being talked about, because you're right. It can use the same terms. It's a good point. Good point. I'm going to move forward just a little bit. And this is a huge list of the table of nations. Now, I'm going to read through this real quick, just so you can kind of get the feel for it. And I frankly don't have a whole lot to say about this, other than to show you a couple of images, which I think are kind of interesting. But just reading through what is considered to be called the Table of Nations. And forgive me when I stumble over all of these names. This is the genealogy of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japhet, and the sons were born to them after the flood. The sons of Japhet are these: Gomer, and Magog, and Madai, and Yavan, and Tubal, and Meshech, and Tiras. And the sons of Gomer are Ashkenaz, and Riphath, and Togarmah. And the sons of Yavan are Elisha, and Tarshish, and Kittim, and Dodanim. And from these the coastland peoples of the nations were separated into their lands, everyone according to his language, according to their clans, into their nations. And the sons of Ham are Cush, and Mitzrayim, and Put, and Canaan. And the sons of Cush are Seba, and Havilah, and Sabta, and Ramah, and Sebteka. And the sons of Ramah are Sheba, and Dedan. And Cush brought forth Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one on the earth. He was a mighty hunter before Yehovah. Therefore it is said, like Nimrod, the mighty hunter before Yehovah. And the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, and Erech, and Akkad, and Calneh in the land of Shinar. From that land he went to Ashur, and built Nineveh, and Rehoboth, and Caleh, and Rezin between Nineveh and Caleh, the great city. And Mitzrayim brought forth Ludim, and Anamim, and Lehabim, and Naphtuhim, and Pathrushim, and Casluhim, from whom came the Philistines and Caphtorim. And Canaan brought forth Sidon, his firstborn, and Heth, and the Jebusite, and the Amorite, and the Girgashite, and the Hivite, and the Archite, and the Sinite, and the Arvadite, and the Semirite, and the Hamathite. And afterward the clans of the Canaanites were spread abroad. And the border of the Canaanites was from Sidon, as you go towards Gerar, as far as Azah, as you go towards Sodom, and Amorah, and Admah, and Zeboim, as far as Lasha. These were the sons of Ham, according to their clans, according to their languages, in their lands, in their nations. And also to Shem, the father of all the children of Eber, the brother of Japhet the elder, were born children. The sons of Shem were Elam, and Ashur, and Arpachshad, and Lud, and Aram. And the sons of Aram, Uz, and Hul, and Gether, and Mash. And Arpachshad brought forth Shelah, and Shelah brought forth Eber, and to Eber were born 2 sons. The name of one was Peleg, for in his days the earth was divided, and his brother's name was Yoktan. And Yoktan brought forth Almodad, and Sheleph, and Hatzarmarveth, and Yera, and Hadoram, and Uzal, and Diklah, and Obal, and Abimiel, and Sheba, and Ophir, and Havilah, and Yobab. All these were sons of Yoktan. And their dwelling place was from Mesha, as you go towards Shafar, a mountain of the east. These were the sons of Shem, according to their clans, according to their languages, in their lands, according to their nations. These were the clans of the sons of Noah, according to their generations, in their nations. And from the nations were divided, and from these the nations were divided on the earth after the flood. So there you have. Now, did you recognize some of these peoples and where they would, what you would maybe equate those with in modern terms? I mean, some of them you would probably, I'm sure, recognize. Now, you've heard of Magog? You've heard of Gog and Magog. That's certainly interesting. How about Tarshish and Kittim? Do you remember those terms coming up later? It's in the book of Daniel in chapter 7. It talks about the ships of Kittim troubling the Antichrist when he's pillaging and rummaging around through there. So these Kittim are still around today. You can see, especially the sons of Canaan, Mitzrayim. Well, that's obviously Egypt. That's the Hebrew word for Egypt. Put, Cush, the peoples of Canaan. I have here a couple of maps that I wanted to show you. I think these are pretty cool. I know I'm sorry if you can't see them terribly well, especially all the old people over there with their old eyes. But here you have Europe. This is southern Europe. Here's the boot of Italy, kicking the island of Sicily. The Greek islands, where it shows Javan, those are the Greeks. Some have speculated that Spain is Tarshish, which is, I think you can make a case for that looking at the book regarding, who's the guy of the whale? Jonah, excuse me. So you've got here, and these are, of course, some are speculated, others are very obvious, like Mitzrayim being Egypt, Pathrusim, Dedan, Havilah, Raman, Sheba. These are the sons of Ham. Now, some have speculated, and wrongly so, that the sons of Ham were all in Africa. That is simply not true. According to the records, the southern coast of this of Arabia, it houses some of the sons of Ham. And then, of course, Shem is, we talked about this before, where you get the name Semitic. Okay, these are the Semitic peoples, and curiously enough, that does include Asian people and the people of the Far East. And you can see Ashur and Elam, Lud in this section is Shem, and then up in the north is Japheth. These are the nations according to Genesis 10. Now this map here gives you Het. You saw the name of Het. That is actually the Hittite Empire. If you guys have never seen, how many of you guys have ever looked at any history documents or history documentaries or anything like that regarding the Hittites? That is some fascinating stuff. Really fascinating stuff. I think that there might be a YouTube video that you can take a look at. these guys in the Hittite Empire were highly advanced, and they had a really powerful empire, the Hittites did. Fascinating stuff. But this gives you a little bit of where these peoples would have settled. This one here is rather curious. This is a map from about 1500. You notice that this map is drawn in an artistic fashion. It almost looks like a flower, where you can see Europe and Asia and Africa. And what's dab smack in the middle of that flower? Jerusalem and the land of Israel. Now, I think that is an interesting way of looking at the world, but frankly, I have looked at it that way for some time. Ever since I've started reading the Bible, it seems very clear to me that this land that God continuously talks about and says his eye is always on that land, that there's something very special and peculiar about this land. And I think that it is, and that's why I put this one up here especially, is because frankly, with Europe and Asia and Egypt, not Egypt, but Africa, excuse me, these are the known land masses for a good chunk of human history. You know what I'm saying? I mean, the Americas, they were nothing in the times of the Bible, and they frankly weren't anything until, 1492? That wasn't terribly long ago. The Americas, South America, I mean, I know that there has been culture going on in North America and South America for a long time, but they really don't have much going on in the biblical narrative. The whole of the history that is recorded in our Bibles is most commonly associated with this little patch of land right here that's no bigger than the state of New Jersey. But I think what's curious about it is that if you're going to interact between Asia and Africa, or Europe and Africa, or Europe and Asia, you're really going right through this land. That land is ideally situated as the crossroads of the entire world, the entire known world for most of human history. And that God's people were placed in that land like in a fishbowl, that the nations all around would always have to travel through the land of the people of God. Now, why do you suppose that might be?
They're the centered witness.
They are a witness, absolutely. And this is, I mean, what was the purpose of him establishing his people? I mean, he says, these people will see your righteousness because you observe my Torah and you follow my instructions and you worship me in the way that I have suggested. And they will say, this is an amazing people with a tremendous wisdom and an incredibly powerful God. Now, it didn't turn out that way because of their disobedience yet. Good point, Mike. Thank you very much. But I think that it is not for no reason that it was set up this way. That the people of God are in a fishbowl. And the work.
Maybe you spread from there, that we indeed originated from there and slowly spread and meet different people like what we talked about in the beginning.
Yeah, and you'll see when we begin our reading here in the next chapter that the humans after the flood seem to have completely congregated in one area right here. Right there in what is now Iraq.
The nation that disappeared.
Yeah.
Syria.
Yeah.
There's speculation that it's going to be brought back.
Could be. Could be. Tracy?
Is that scripture, I think it's in Zechariah, is that the one that, is it talking about Israel as the apple of his eye? Is that, am I correct? I'm looking at it.
Yeah, I can't remember off the top of my head, but yes.
I think it's either the people or the land, but as the apple of the eye, but he left Judah in Jerusalem as a light, and that light in the center, and if that's supposed to be like the pupil of his eye, if the eye is good, the light, and the side talks about, so I think there's something about that center being where the light comes from. Also, too, when you think about the tabernacle and what's in the center of the tabernacle and the ark, and the menorah, and where the light comes from, it comes from the center. It's kind of like a big picture of that.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Was there another question? Okay. Like I said, I don't have a lot to say about this, and this section here does bring up a little bit regarding Nimrod, but it's just an introduction to him, and I think we all know that. What does the word Nimrod mean?
Hunter.
Not quite.
Mighty hunter.
Mighty hunter?
No, that's what's said about him.
Oh.
What does his name mean? His name Nimrod means rebel. He's a rebel. And you all, I'm sure, have heard, what does it mean that he is a mighty hunter before Yehovah? What would be a better literal translation of that?
In the face of.
In the face of God.
Which we saw that also used with, I forget who it was. Was it Cain or was it Abel? It says the same terminology of being before
Before the
Lord.
face.
We ran into that.
Yeah. I think
earlier
we
in
talked
Genesis.
about that earlier, right? And he was a rebel too.
And it was a good thing.
Yeah.
That's the thing. This is always interpreted negatively. I mean, rightfully so, probably. But the same phrase is
Sure.
used in a positive light.
Yeah, I can see how it would be before the Lord. And yeah.
And it also uses in verse 8 that same word began that we saw from Noah.
Yes.
About
Defiling.
yourself.
Yes, absolutely. I don't want to go into too much depth regarding Nimrod at this point, because in the next chapter is where most of what happens with Nimrod happens. I will just make a couple of comments here regarding, you know, that the list of all those people that we just read, you know how many nations came out of that? How many nations are listed there? You don't have to count them. You think about your Jewish history.
70?
It's 70 nations, yes. It's curious also that during the Feast of Sukkot, are you aware of the sacrifice of the bulls during the Feast of Sukkot? How many bulls are sacrificed during the Feast of Sukkot? 70. There's 12 on day 1, 11 on day 2, 10 on day 3, and so on, and that equals 70 nations. Now, what does that suggest to you? During the Feast of Sukkot, the Jews are sacrificing 70 bulls. What are they doing?
Sacrifice for the nations.
They are making
nation.
atonement for the nations. Absolutely. And that is a shadow picture in itself. A huge shadow picture. Now, we're not going to discuss that in the book of Genesis because that doesn't come up until Leviticus, obviously. But just remember that these 70 nations, and yeah, you can look at the world today and say, well, there's more than 70 nations. Yes, there are in the geopolitical sense of what we're talking about in today's world. But these 70 people groups, which you would call the genesis of today's nations, and that they would have divided simply more than they were at this time. Tracy?
It's interesting that you said that, because in Zechariah is when it talks about future end times, and all nations will come and observe the Feast of Tabernacles. So I wonder if there's some kind of connection with.
I totally believe that, and there is a lot, especially in rabbinic literature, about the festival of Sukkot being a lot about the nations, and that is, especially
because
into that.
we are like trees, and we make those tabernacles out
Yeah.
of different types of trees, and
Yep.
I've always thought that represents the people as this flesh tabernacle that we're living in.
Absolutely.
Basically, it's like a picture of that.
I would absolutely agree with that.
One more cross-reference with the 70 nations. In the book of Jasher, it's noted that at that time there were 70 languages. And it says that to become the Pharaoh, because apparently Egypt was the center of the government of the world at that point, you couldn't become the Pharaoh without knowing the 70 languages of the planet. Of the
That's
world.
interesting.
Yeah.
That's interesting. It's always been curious to me as a that my background is in history. I studied history in college. That I've always been curious about when you open up a history book, any history book, whether it's an encyclopedia or a book of ancient history, the first thing that you're going to find is a chapter which they call prehistory, which they really have no idea. They're just talking about cavemen and Neanderthals. They have no idea what's going on there. But then the first trace of human civilization, where they actually have monuments and writing and things like that, is right here. Egypt and Mesopotamia. And then, of course, the Indus River Valley in China. But I think that, frankly, that came a little bit later, but probably not much later. The most ancient of human civilizations are in Egypt and Mesopotamia in the land of Iraq. And that is where human history begins. And it just goes so wonderfully with the Bible.
That's where the Tigris and Euphrates are too. At least,
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, this is the Tigris and this is the Euphrates right here. That's what Mesopotamia means, is the land between the rivers. You got Babylon and Ur of the Chaldees and Calne and Nineveh. That's part of the Assyrian Empire up here. The Assyrian Empire was completely wiped out. There's not much left there except some ruins. Keith?
What's a good source? I see you grab some maps from somewhere. What's a good source that actually you can open a book with some maps that are old enough when you read the Bible, you can go back and start figuring some stuff out?
That's a great question. When I was in college studying history, they always assigned us textbooks and stuff to read, which were, frankly done in the last, since the 90s and the 80s. And I never liked them because they were slanted, and this is when revisionism really began to occur. And so what I did was I would go to antique shops whenever I visited the city, whenever I would go into downtown Phoenix, or I would go to Colorado, I'd go to Denver. I would just visit antique shops, and they have tons and tons of old books that are practically worthless. They're almost giving them away. And I would especially look for history books. And so I have a collection of history books which were published at the turn of the century up until the First World War. And those have a much more traditionalist interpretation of history that really tracks pretty well with the Bible. Because, these were books that were published in America before the radical 60s, if you want to put it that way, when they began to revise history. And I have found those to be my most reliable sources of historical information and the most biblical, because the writers of those times were just barely getting into historical revisionism, and they, the Bible to them was a historical document, and they looked at it as truth and history. And so I would suggest, you're not going to find these books online. You go to a used bookstore or go to an antique shop, and find old history books. I have found them to be absolutely awesome and compelling, really neat stuff. And you get a lot, and what's interesting is when you read these older history books about the Babylonian Empire and the Assyrian Empire and the Egyptian Empire, they're constantly referencing Israel and Israel's relationship to these places. Because the people of America, for a lot of its history, were a pretty religious people who really believed in the Bible, and the founders were strongly religious. And so I find these books to be particularly fascinating. It's just me.
And the today's history books don't cite anything.
No, you got today like Howard Zinn's The People's History of the United States. That's trash. Absolute trash.
That was my textbook for junior year.
Yeah,
History.
Howard Zinn has become real popular with this people's history. Whenever you see the people's anything, it makes me think of communism.
Volkswagen.
They're Volkswagen, yeah.
The people's car.
Yeah, so I just stay away from any current historical research. And you can look at, what's really cool is that a lot of universities have digitized their texts. And you can go to the university library online and get free access to a lot of historical texts that have been digitized, because you go to your library now, they're emptying out the books. What they have is computers. And so it's thankfully they've begun to do a lot of digitizing of these ancient or old books, and you can get them online for free if you just access the university library. It's pretty cool.
As they say, if you want a new idea, read an old book.
That's right. That's a great way to put it. It's a great way to put it. So just a couple of notes in regard to Nimrod. Yes, his name means rebel. He was in God's face. He established Babel as the beginning of his kingdom. You know that Babel means confusion. You know, it's interesting too that the word in Hebrew, Babel, is also, you spell it backwards, it's the word heart. Lavab, which to me that says that Babel is the place of people with a backwards heart, led by a rebel.
Well, that's where we're supposed to come out of.
That's right.
It would just be after God's own heart. When you put the Torah together and you spell the first letter and the last letter of Torah, it spells heart.
That's
So
right.
if you want to know his heart, that's where you'll find it.
Absolutely, good point. So you might say that these are the people of a backward heart led by a rebel. And this is kind of interesting, I just make a brief comment before we go into the next section, is that most commentators in rabbinic circles especially mention Nimrod as a tyrannical government institution that is religious in nature, which is a devastating combination. A strong tyrannical government with a religious basis of some kind. Those two things are really dangerous together. I wanted to point out one thing. I don't know how much time we have, just probably a few more minutes, but I wanted to read something from the stone Chumash, which I found rather interesting. And you can look this up yourself and see what you think of it, but this is Rabbi Raphael Hirsch says that Noah was born in the year 1056 from creation. The flood occurred in 1656, and he died in 2006, 10 years after the dispersion of chapter 11. Abraham was born in 1948 from the creation, thus he knew Noah and was 58 years old when Noah died. It is fascinating that from Adam to Abraham, there was a word-of-mouth tradition spanning only 4 people: Adam, Lamech, Noah, and Abraham. So you can see the timeline in Rashi's commentary. Similarly, Moses, through whom the Torah was given, saw Kehath, who saw Jacob, who saw Abraham. Accordingly, there were not more than 7 people who carried the tradition firsthand from Adam to the generation that received the Torah. Just looking at the compression of the timeline, and I know that you guys have probably done that before when you've looked at these timelines. He lived so far and he lived so far, that you really begin to see the overlap. That these people lived during each other's times. That you can easily lose sight of that when you're just looking at he lived for this long and he lived for this long, and you just read this huge list that you don't realize there's a tremendous overlap of these people, and that they, there wasn't a lot of generations passing, and it is entirely possible that there were only 4 people passing along information from Adam to Lamech to Noah to Abraham. Their lives overlapped. Not obviously not Adam and all the way to Abraham, but these 4 individuals would overlap. Tracy?
Did you say Abraham was born in 1948? And that?
Yeah.
That's interesting, because if that's true,
fascinating, isn't it?
If that's true, that's when Israel became a nation, right?
I find it fascinating myself.
Yeah, our time.
Yeah.
I've never heard it put that way before, so it's like.
Yeah, isn't that a little?
The promise to Abraham is that the nations, all nations, will be blessed in your seed.
Yeah, isn't that is very interesting. That definitely caught my attention. I wondered if somebody would catch that. Yes, that Abraham was born in 1948, and the state of Israel was rebirthed in 1948. Now, Angela has.
Have you guys seen this timeline thing? You guys have a copy of this?
If you've watched the videos of Zach Bauer, he has ripped out the pages of this book and hung him on his wall behind his head. Wow. This is an awesome book. I used to use this when I was a history teacher to show my students.
This is a great visual way to see what he was talking about, because you have Adam here. You can see how long he lived. It's like a little tree thing. And you can see when other people were born.
All right.
So you can see how long and how he was still alive when this guy way down here was born. And then it has the Tower of Babel right here. So we've gone up to this point. And then it shows those nations. And it even calls Greece Yavam.
And so you can see Mitzrayim, Egypt. You can see how those came off of there, and it has little pictures of their Nephilim. I mean, their gods.
They're Nephilim.
So if you want to.
Yeah, this is a really awesome book that I found
This would be a lot of work.
like at Barnes and Noble for like $5.
And
Like,
it
that's
follows,
really awesome.
Nobody wants this.
I know.
On the clearance rack.
Here's Japheth, Shem, and Ham, and then from there it follows Shem.
Yep.
Well, the walls are.
Okay, so we made this comment about, Nathan made the comment about the Nephilim. And all these people that knew of the Nephilim, didn't they all get wiped out in the flood? Then everybody who would know about them after that they would be able to say, like, you know.
Well, his 3 sons.
Huh?
And their
Shem,
wives.
Ham, and Japheth would have had to spread that knowledge. Either that or the Nephilim were on the earth after the flood.
That's what, yeah, did someone
what the Bible
live or
says.
something?
Well, of course they were, because Goliath had 6 fingers. And
Well, and the
6
Bible
toes.
says that the Nephilim were on the earth both before and after the flood.
Oh, does it? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's
That's the mystery.
But it makes you
Industry.
wonder. It makes me
Oh,
wonder a little bit
good.
if Noah's daughters-in-law might have had some of that Nephilim blood in them.
That's one of the things.
If you read one of the not the commentaries, but one of those extra biblical sources, it says that one of these guys, like, who was it, Og, or the Og of Bashan, or
Og,
something
King
like
Og.
that, was holding on to the ark.
Yeah.
That's pretty funny.
Yeah,
Anyway, that's certainly some fascinating stuff. But yeah, I just wanted to point out to you the overlapping history of the patriarchs, and I think it's also curious to note that the rabbinic sources also note that there would have probably not been more than 7 people who had the tradition of the Torah handed down all the way from Adam to Abraham.
And it
These
has that in
people would-
links on here, right here at the top of this. It shows those 7 links to Moses, actually, I think.
Yeah, all the way to Moses. From Adam to Moses was 7 people that lives would have overlapped. Well, I think that's
You're
just
talking the
fascinating.
righteous people that are called out.
Yeah, the people who are carrying God's truth to some degree or another. 7 people whose lives would have overlapped just a little bit from all the way from creation to the time that Moses received the Torah at Mount Sinai. And only 4 people to Abraham. It's fascinating stuff. I mean, think about it. Abraham lived, 175 years or something like that. Isaac, 130, something like that. And what did Jacob said to Pharaoh when he went to Egypt finally to be with his son? And Pharaoh asked him, "How old are you?" He's like, "Oh, my life has been short and evil, brutal and nasty and short." But I think he was like, I think he was like 160 or something like that. So not a whole lot of time is passing. I mean, you can see in the book of Jasher, for example, that the Hebrews have traditionally interpreted Melchizedek to be none other than Shem himself. That when Abraham came to the Valley of Kings and got into this battle with those kings of Amraphel and Goyim, to fight and free his nephew Lot, who was captured in Sodom, that he met Melchizedek. They interpret, according to the book of Jasher, and some of the other extra biblical sources, that Melchizedek was actually Shem.
But I thought he didn't have a father, no mother,
Neither no beginning nor end of days.
Yeah.
That's written by the author of Hebrews, and we don't know who that is, but I don't know. He was making a point, and I don't know. I think he was making a good point, making a good case to say that there was a priesthood that existed before Levi was even born, and that would be represented by Melchizedek, and that the Bible, the straight-up biblical narrative, tells us nothing about Melchizedek. And in the book of Jasher and the book of Jubilees, it references it in passing, not real strongly, but it says that Melchizedek, it doesn't actually identify Melchizedek at all. It actually says Shem. Whether those sources are reliable or not is I leave entirely to you. But I think that the information that we're about to dive into in chapter 11 would simply be too overwhelming to start at this point, since we're running a little late. But
Did we mention Eber? Like where?
no, I think that we do have at least a couple of minutes to discuss Eber. Yeah, what would you say regarding that, Tracy?
Well, just that appears to be where the name Hebrew comes from.
Yes.
It's the same.
Yes, absolutely. Eber means like over there, across.
One who crosses over.
Yeah, well, Hebrew would be where you get the word Hebrew, huh?
They cross over.
They crossed over.
It's just a
with it.
conjugation of
Yeah, and so that is definitely because we know that Abraham left Ur of Chaldee or the Kasdim and left his nation and his family. Now, there's some fascinating stuff. We'll get into that in chapter 11 regarding what happened to Abraham's brother Nahor. You can read in the book of Jasher. There's some fascinating stuff there about what happened in the land. And apparently, Nimrod and Abraham were contemporaries. And Abraham and his family. Do you know the story about the night that Abraham was born, when all of the Chaldean astronomers gave a party with his father Terah, and they came out of his house after they were drunk and had a big old party the night that Abraham was born, and some kind of weird star was shooting across the four corners of the sky. And they were like, what in the heck is
Well,
that?
in Jasher it says they tried to kill him too because he was prophesied.
Well, that
as
was
subverting
they somehow ascertained through their astrology that this sign in the heavens was an indication that the child that was just born to Terah was going to his descendants would rule the entire earth and destroy all nations, and that therefore they went and told Nimrod. They said, we got to tell Nimrod, because if we don't tell him, he's going to find out from somebody else, and then he's going to kill us. So they went and told him, and so Nimrod went to Abraham's father Terah and said, I need you to give me that boy so that I can kill him. And of course Abraham was like, I got a story for you. Do you remember that fabulous horse that you gave me? Oh yes, there's no horse like that in the entire world. Well, a guy came to me and asked me for that horse and told me he would give me $100 million. What do you think I should do? And the king Nimrod was like, are you kidding me? There's no horse like that in the world. He's priceless. You don't sell that horse. Are you retarded? And he's like, you have said it yourself. This is my son. No, because Nimrod had told him, I'll give you your whole house full of gold to compensate you for your son, but I'm going to kill that son. So Abraham took one of his, Abraham's father Terah took one of his servants' children and gave it to Nimrod in the place of Abraham, and he bashed that child's skull on the ground and smashed it to death. And then Abraham and his mother absconded to go and live with Noah and Shem for until he was 40 years old. And then he came back to the land of the Chaldees and stood up to Nimrod. Nimrod captured him and threw him into a fiery furnace where the flames would not touch him, which is kind of interesting. And Nahor, his brother, was like, they were saying, are you on the side of Abraham? And when he saw that Abraham wasn't burnt, he said, I think I am.
Yeah.
And they threw him into the fire too, only he did not survive. He got burned up. And that's why it says that Nahor died in the face of his father. His father watched him die in Ur of the Chaldees, killed by Nimrod.
Where do you hear all this?
It's all in the book of Jasher.
Oh.
Fascinating stuff. Whether it's true or not, I don't know. It's certainly fascinating.
Well, is it not written in the book of Jasher?
Is it not written in the book of Jasher? Yes, it apparently is. I don't know what you want to make of that, Tracy.
I was just going to talk about that word Hebrew for a second, if you
Please.
don't care. But so it means one who has passed over or passed through, and there's kind of like that picture of we are just passing through this earth.
A sojourner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also passing through the waters. One has crossed over. They crossed over the Red Sea. They crossed over the Jordan.
Mm-hmm.
But the Hebrew word picture is really, really neat because we know that the word debar is word. We talked about how the letters mean the door to the house of the Most High. So the word is the door to the kingdom of God, basically. Well, Eber is spelled pretty similarly, except it's ayin beit resh. So it's I, one who sees the house of the Most High. So one who crosses over will see the kingdom of God.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Also, when you look at the word, so Eber is the root, but Ibri is Hebrew in Hebrew. And when you put a yod at the end of a word, that denotes possession, so like mine. So I was looking at that word in the Hebrew. It actually means embryo in Hebrew as well. So it's my embryo, my seed. It's kind of like Yahovah's seed or the Hebrews. I just thought
that is a good word
that's
picture.
really neat.
Yeah, that is a great word picture. That is, and I think that's a good point, that an embryo or a seed, that this land and this people are like a deposit. You know how Paul says that, you know, he gave you the Spirit of God as a down payment of the stuff that would be brought to you later on in the book of Ephesians. I think that this people and this land is his ownership symbol, and his down payment is like the firstborn, the seed, the genesis of what is to be the kingdom in coming days.
I think it's also about being born again or born from above.
Sure.
It's when we become Hebrew.
Yeah.
We are part of Israel.
People
We
who
are
have
Hebrew,
crossed
so
over.
We owe that spiritual seed.
Absolutely. Do you? I think we'll stop at this point, and then we'll pick up with Nimrod and the Tower of Babel and some curious things next week. Any other questions, comments, or concerns at this point?
Just that when somebody calls you a Nimrod, they don't mean anything nice by it.
No, they don't.
I was thinking that myself.
Hey, Nimrod.
Yeah, Nimrod. I don't think they're being kind. No, but they probably don't mean it in its biblical sense
They
of
don't
being a
even know
rebel. Anyway, let's pray.